Same-sex marriage. We've been talking about it here on Legal Video Blog for about the last 2 years because of the changes taking place in the United States. Increasingly, states are adopting same-sex marriage. Well, that's terrific in the eyes of an awful lot of people who want to have a same-sex marriage. But now, are they going to be able to live happily ever after? We'll see what happens, and guess what? Some same-sex couples find that they don't want to live happily ever after because they're not happy. And so they move to get a divorce. And in some instances, we've got couples who went to another state to get married because they were living in a state that didn't recognize same-sex marriage. They might have been living in Texas, might have been living in Georgia, or someplace else of that nature. But they go to a state that allows same-sex marriage, such as California. They get married, and then they move back home. Then things don't go well. Then they want a divorce. So they go to court to get a divorce. Well, guess what? The state they're living in does not recognize same-sex marriage, so they can't get a divorce because their marriage isn't recognized to begin with. So how do they get a divorce? Well, one thing they could do is move to the state where they got married, but they have to meet a residency requirement. And meeting a residency requirement may mean that they have to be in that state together for 6, maybe as long as a year, 6 months to a year. And they may not be able to do that because of their work obligations. So what do they wind up? Well, they're stuck in a state there that doesn't recognize same-sex marriage. They can't get a divorce, and they wind up in wedlock. They're stuck. And what about child custody? Well, if one of the parties to the marriage was already the biological parent of the child, then that's pretty easy to figure out. But what happens if one of the couple had adopted the child? Well, if one of them adopted the child, that's easy to figure out too. That parent becomes the custodial parent in the event of divorce. But the other parent may not be happy with that. So what's being suggested by some advocates for same-sex marriage is that when you have a same-sex marriage, both parents adopt the child. But guess what? Number of states do not allow a same-sex couple to have both the parents adopt the child. They allow that for a normal or heterosexual marriage, but don't allow it for a same-sex couple, mainly because nobody's thought about this before. So for the time being, when it comes to child custody, well, that may not go well, not because the same-sex couple did something wrong, but simply because the law hasn't been entirely thought through. So, what do we learn from this? What do we learn from this? Well, we learn an important lesson, and that is while a same-sex couple can get married, they really need to give some consideration to where they'll get married and how they will then conduct their marriage later, where they're going to live, and what rights they will have under the law, particularly if they're living in a state that does not recognize same-sex marriage. Okay, we bring you this case as we bring you cases every week so you understand how the law works. I'm David Allen.